Welcome to Transition Talks, Business Exit and Retirement Strategies with Josh Ackerman. Get ready to be immersed in real-life experiences and strategies of business owners who have transitioned their enterprises, whether by selling or handing over the reins to the next generation. Through candid conversations and expert insights, Josh aims to provide practical tips and proven techniques to tackle the complexities of succession planning. Let's embark on your next chapter together.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast, Transition Talks, hosted by Josh Ackerman. Josh, it's springtime. The weather's getting warmer. The promise of great and wonderful things is in the air, including my allergies.
It is the season, man.
Oh,
no
boy,
question.
It is. I can't go. If I forget my Zyrtec in the morning, I know by about 11 o'clock, So.
Yeah. Yep. I'm right there with you.
So how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Like you said, like you, I'm enjoying what looks to be some signs of spring.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. And I've got a friend of mine, Matt Lockaby, on today. Matt is an attorney here in Lexington and has great experience working with business owners, both from the buy side and the sell side.
Yeah.
And as an added superpower, he also has done some work with HR consulting, helping the acquiring company integrate cultures when they bring in the new group. So I thought we'd have a lawyer come on and talk to us and kind of have the same sort of conversation we've been having with other professionals about what do you wish your client, the client who comes to Matt and says, "Hey, I want to buy this, I want to sell this."
Mm-hmm.
What do you wish those folks knew before they walked in the door? Where do you see that transaction going wrong? And hopefully we can help our listeners get ahead of the curve on some of these things and get a better outcome. So that's kind of the goal.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to this conversation because we don't talk a lot about the buy side of these equations. So please get this conversation started. There
we go. Matt, good afternoon. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Josh. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so. I always enjoy our conversations, so I think it'll be good. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be sitting here?
Sure. Well, I've been a lawyer now for 19 years, and for the majority of my career, I've been a labor and employment lawyer. And our client base is predominantly small business, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm working directly with owners. I'm working directly with the number two in the business. Some of our clients are a little larger and they have in-house teams like HR departments or business unit leaders and things like that. But I'm dealing with owners on a day-to-day basis. And over the years, that has just expanded from discrimination and harassment claims to contract work like non-competes and employment agreements and things like that. And it has naturally expanded into the corporate realm. So we do a ton of work with startups and with businesses to select their entity, to form the entity, to work with them with governance along the way. And at least as it's relevant to our conversation today, we're helping businesses buy and sell. So, and working directly with owners in that process.
Excellent. So if you were to talk about, and I realize because I've asked this question enough now that I know the answer, if you were to talk about the average client who comes into you and says, let's say that they want to sell the business. They've decided, in keeping kind of with the theme of the show, family-owned business, and the sale is either to an internal entity or they're just going to sell the business to someone outside the family. What kind of things do you see the owners, when they come to you, what are the things that they don't understand that you wish maybe they thought about ahead of time?
Right. It's a really important question because we tend to see the same things over and over again. And it really doesn't matter if we represent a seller or if we represent a buyer, and we're now encountering a seller in the transaction. But the first thing that, or the most common thing that we see, is that the seller doesn't know his or her goals, and they don't really know about the timing to accomplish those goals. So I start very broadly and very generically, in a sense, with what do you want? And you'd be surprised. It doesn't matter who you ask this question to. Most people can't give you a straight answer to something as simple as what do you want, right? And
100%. Yeah.
It's very true for business owners too, right? Do you want to fully liquidate? Do you want to sell? Do you want to be on a beach in several months, right? Mm-hmm. Are you looking to bring on an investor who's going to bring some energy, obviously some capital, some new ideas to help you expand? What is it that you want out of this transaction? Now, the sellers that we're dealing with, they're selling their life's work, right? This is the legacy that they have built. Maybe the children don't have an interest in taking over. But for those looking to just get out, the next question really is, are you mentally or emotionally or psychologically ready to sell?
Yeah.
And this is probably truer, or I guess a more common conversation in someone in your line of work with, how are we planning to get to accomplish this goal? What does the next phase of your life really look like?
Sure.
Most owners, even though they say they're ready, or even though they're trying to take their company to market, emotionally or psychologically, they're really not ready to part ways with their baby, their life's work. So if you can get this down, if you can figure out what it is that you want, and you can figure out that way to mentally and emotionally get yourself ready for that next phase, then most other things in the sale process are going to be easier, because you have a plan, you have a strategy to accomplish that, or to get through the plan, and it can help you sidestep a lot of tricky obstacles or tricky issues along the way.
Well, I agree with all of that, and I would say, when I sit down with new clients and it's husband and wife, and we're talking, and I ask, where are we going? What are the goals? And 9 times out of 10, maybe more, the answer that I get is about where we're going, what the goals are, is a combination of what the client thinks their spouse wants me to hear, and what the client thinks I want to hear, and maybe the last couple commercials they saw. Mm-hmm. So if they saw a commercial for a cruise to Europe, it's very possible that I will hear about a cruise to Europe, and maybe a new Lincoln Navigator, depending if that was the commercial. So I think, because most people have never been asked the question, what do you want, in as all-encompassing a way as, what do you want your life to look like when it looks completely different than it does today? When you no longer get up and go to the office, which with some of these owners, you've been doing for 40 plus years. And we're going to change all of that habit. And now you're going to get up and do something else. And I think you're exactly right. That's the question. And if we can help folks figure that part out, then even, I'm hoping you're going to agree with this, even with some of the legal issues that come up, if we have that North Star, this is where the financial services industry puts a compass or a map on the marketing material. And once you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere. But this is why they do it. This is not a new idea. Once you have the North Star that you can make decisions on, then you can say, okay, I know this is where I want to go. Help me get through this legal issue the bbest way we can so that I can get to this goal.
100%. And
Cool.
from a boots on the ground standpoint, when we're talking about M&A,
Mhm.
and especially what, we in the industry, we would call Main Street M&A, right? Businesses that are by and large selling for something less than $5 or $10 million. The way that this lack of a North Star that is kind of defined and the route determined at the very outset
Mhm.
is you get a lot of practical issues during the process that can really derail a deal or can really turn off what could be a phenomenal buyer for the business. And, things like owners will overvalue the business. They won't look objectively at
Sure.
kind of objective market data or the multiples that are in play or the risk factors that a buyer is assessing as they take on this business. You get some indecisiveness during negotiations. You get a level of defensiveness about the company because, let's face it, during due diligence, your business is under a microscope.
Yeah.
And you're given information and feedback from people that you don't really know very well, and more often than not. And as a result, you may not have that relationship to speak frankly with them, but they're going to speak frankly with you, and they're going to uncover every little thing that you've been overlooking for years. And so it could lead to remorse, which can have some tricky consequences when it comes time for closing. So the way that this indecisiveness or this lack of North Star, as you put it,
Mhm.
I think really well, can manifest itself in different ways during the deal process, and none of which is helpful for the deal or for the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, I was talking to another lawyer in town about a similar conversation, and he was telling me that he's had more than one owner work with him on the transaction of selling the business, and the contracts are signed, the check is in the seller's hand, it's maybe in the bank, and the seller will email the attorney a couple of days after the transaction and say, I think I made a mistake. And the attorney will say, I hear you. There's not much I can do about that. And so we'd like to keep people from getting themselves into the position where they are perhaps making the transaction harder than it needs to be because, as you said, at the root of that difficulty is the fact that the owner's just not ready to make this thing happen.
I totally agree. And I guess one of the reasons why I love this work so much is that I really like business owners. I like entrepreneurs. I like people who go out every day and bet on themselves, regardless of clearly all of the risks that you take on, in addition to just trying to earn some money for yourself and your family and give your family a great life. But there an attachment comes along with that of what you've built, clearly with the help of a variety of others along the way. And it's a difficult thing. And I think most owners are not blind to the ultimate payoff at some point, and they're working toward that for the most part actively. Right. But once it comes time for that, it is far more emotional than they will give it credit for. But surrounding yourself with, the right team of advisors is a really big help. But regardless of who the advisors are, at the end of the day, you still have to answer that question: what do I really want? And how is this process going to work around getting what I want?
Yeah. I think, in my experience, that conversation is hardly ever happens in the office. I can ask the question and I can get an answer, or maybe even two, in the course of a conversation. But the real value, I think, is in presenting the question and asking the clients, take this question home with you, work on it a little bit, maybe walk the dog and think about it, wash some dishes. That helps. I've got some clients that came up with fantastic answers. They would meet after work at my office. We'd have a late afternoon meeting, and they would then leave the meeting and go to dinner together after every planning conversation. And the stuff they came up with at dinner as they kind of worked through all the things we talked about was just phenomenal.
Well, just this idea though of setting aside specific time just for this. Let's and the idea to like break some bread together, even better, right? Just you're not at the office, you're not getting distracted by phone calls and emails and all the things that divert a business owner's attention all day.
Right.
Great idea. And I've told people too that, I've told more people than not that, look, it's going to take 2 years, right? Could it be 1 year? Could it be 3 years? Yes, of course. But 2 years gives you enough time to do all the things that we'll get into here a little bit later, but also get through these other more mental, emotional, psychological issues of how you really are going to get to where you want to go. And again, figuring out where that is or what that is.
Yeah, what that looks like. Sure.
Yeah.
So from a legal perspective, what takes the most time? We've talked to investment bankers on the show before, and they give the exact same time frame you do, right? They've talked about 18 months, 2 years, with 2 years being the better than 18 months. From your perspective, what are the things that have to get worked through in order to make the transaction happen?
There are a couple of things. One is, I would say, not so much legal as it is like financial. Sellers really just have to clean up their books. And let's face it, most small businesses, right? Let's take the average small business that's doing $1, maybe $2, maybe $3 million in revenue a year. There are all kinds of non-operational expenses on their books, right? The standard owner's perks, that things the owner runs through the business in the owner's discretion. So financials really aren't GAAP compliant. They're not audited, and nor would they be. The company's too small. But they really have to make an effort to clean up the books, figure out what are these one-time expenses that can be eliminated. What are all of our discretionary earnings or discretionary expenses we're running through the firm? How do we clean that up or at least adjust for it?
Right.
I've been supremely impressed when I'm representing a buyer and we get a set of financial statements from a seller, and that seller already has a list of all of the discretionary expenses and earnings that buyers are not going to run through the business.
Right.
It gets you to a point very quickly where you can determine fair market value, right? You know what your adjustments are going to be. You know what the add backs are going to be. You can get a real handle on what seller's discretionary earnings or SDE really is. And for a buyer, that gives you a lot of confidence in setting your pro forma for the first year or 2 years after the close. And you can really forecast what your cash flow will look like, assuming no changes or assuming or incorporating whatever assumptions you want to as part of the deal. But normalizing those earnings is I can't stress enough how important that is. Having a good relationship with your CPA or accountant to be able to get that information together, so that when that buyer comes along, you're prepared and you're not giving them what amounts to a complete mess. The worst thing you want to do is have a qualified buyer who's got the money or the ability to get the financing, wants to keep your employees and continue building on the legacy that you've built, to turn them off because they think you're too much of a risk because they can't trust your financials.
Well, and I think from the seller perspective, I've had experience with that exact thing where we had partners that I was working with on the planning side. And so I knew what they were running through the business because I talked to their in-house bookkeeper. And we looked at the offer, and the offer was adjusted for the internal expenses was 2.5 years worth of income. It was 3 or 4 before you added back all the things that ran through the business. Mm-hmm. And the seller told me after the fact, after their final sale went through, that he said, Josh, the first thing we should have done was actually understand how much money we were taking out of the business, mm-hmm. because our paycheck was not the number. And
not
so, yeah. So when we had to go forecast that and try and recreate that kind of income, we weren't starting at the right number.
And it has, and this, again, it ends up being symptomatic of all of the things that can happen during the process, right?
Sure.
So your pre-LOI, right? Your letter of intent, setting forth your basic deal parameters, getting to that LOI can take longer because buyers want one more round after one more round of financial disclosures or answers to questions to clean up, or to clarify what they can't quite make sense of when they're looking at your books. Maybe it means due diligence takes longer because, a savvy buyer, a strategic buyer is just not going to move forward if they have questions about your financials.
Right.
So it could, if it decreases the buyer's confidence in your business, you can expect more risk mitigation provisions for the buyer in your purchase agreement, right? That could mean less favorable earnout terms. It could mean an increased risk of purchase price adjustments before closing or after closing. So there's all these things that can come up, which can be really tricky to negotiate. But if you've got clean financials and you can justify what's going in, what's coming out, you put yourself in a great position. And I think the other thing that's part and parcel to this is, as a seller, you have to sell this narrative to buyers, right? Like, yes, you want to buy me, right? I want to get out because I'm ready for my next phase of life, not because I'm not making money and I can't take the grind anymore. You selling to the buyer, here's where we can expand. Here's the value you can bring. Here's where you can streamline some expenses. Here's whatever it might be, right? Here's the synergies that I think you can capture. It's really hard to sell that narrative if your financials are a mess and you don't even know what's coming in, what's going out, and kind of the lack of maintenance of your books that's causing a lot of questions and concerns for a buyer.
Well, again, I think I've got another client that had a wholesale business. He sells retail and he sells wholesale, and discovered from his CPA that he legitimately and quite literally lost 5 cents on every unit that he sold wholesale. So the worst thing he could do was to continue trying to get wholesale business because the math was not in his favor.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, I think the idea of having the financials organized in this conversation, we're not really just talking about the financials. We're talking about the financials as sort of an early proxy for, do you, the seller, have enough understanding of your business that, like you said, that you can sell me on the opportunity, right? The sale of the business is the end of the owner's marathon. It's the beginning of the buyer's, right? Those two things are going to happen simultaneously. You, the seller, are going to wake up and not have to go to work in the morning, and the buyer's got to get up and go to work in the morning because they need to go create value and pay off the note that they took or do whatever it is. they need to go build the business and make themselves a success. Mm-hmm. So these two things have to kind of happen together. So if you would, tell us a story about a sale that you think went particularly well or particularly poorly as sort of an illustration of some of this stuff. Can you do that?
Yeah. Let's see. We've had the first story I would tell is about a seller who was not ready to sell. But at the same time, the seller was ready to get out, right? The seller had already bought a house in Florida. They were checked out. They were ready to go. And I represented the buyer in this transaction. And when you get someone who's not ready, you see the same things we've just talked about. Their financials are in a mess. They're treating it like they've been doing their QuickBook entries at 11 o'clock at night. The way that they're operating is not as ideal as it could be if they had, 1 to 2 years of prep time. And we can talk about what that means here in a little bit, but mentally the seller was checked out. So what does this mean for a buyer? My buyer was able to secure a seller's note at an interest rate that was way below market. Great terms for my buyer, mm-hmm. But seller's notes generally come along with a higher interest rate than you would get from private financing because of the increased risk the seller is undertaking. But the seller was ready to go. So we get a seller's note with less money down and a lower interest rate. The other thing is we end up getting, my buyer didn't have to sign a personal guarantee. So which is unheard of if you're getting SBA financing, right? Or even for most other private financing. So there's a combination of issues here. One was the representative was not anyone with any real experience in these types of transactions. But when you are not ready to sell, you can expect someone who's more savvy to take advantage of you. Sure. And pitch it to you in a way that, look, you really want to get out. You've already moved. I'm here to help you get out.
Exactly.
And it's my client got a really good deal at a lower interest rate with less money down than they would have otherwise been required. And I think the seller probably didn't get as much for the company as I think it might have been worth. But who am I to determine the value? It's the seller. Right. It's their business. But if you're not ready, it's really hard to stake out a position on a variety of issues that come up, whether they're business issues or whether they're legal issues. When you're in the midst of negotiations on the purchase agreement, it's really hard to stake out a ground and really know where you got to stand firm, what interest you really need to protect, where you can give ground because it's less important or there's less risk if you're not ready to sell.
Well, I think you make a really strong point, which is I think some percentage of businesses aren't going to transition. They're not going to sell. And some of them aren't going to sell because the owner is going to keep the business until they wake up on a Wednesday morning and maybe it's raining outside and they look outside and they say, you know what, I'm not going to work anymore. Yep. I'm just not going to do it. And once you've gotten to the point where you're just burned out, you'll sell it for whatever someone will offer, maybe today. Maybe it's the best offer you get today. And when you're talking about a building or a business that someone has built over 30, 40 years, you hate to see that value just go away, right? You'd love to see the owner get fair value for the work that they put in. But I think, like you're saying, if you're not ready to sell or if you're not ready to engage in the 2-year process, then it's going to go for whatever you can get. And that may be pennies on the dollar.
Right. And maybe that is, the fair market value for a company in that situation, right? I mean, this is what a willing buyer is willing to pay to a willing seller. But yeah, I have a level of sympathy for the business owners who aren't able or aren't willing or aren't prepared to go through that process, because they're going to leave a lot of money on the table. More
Yeah.
often than not, they're going to leave money on the table. And I mean, I work with these people every day in my law practice. This is, like I said, this is their life's work. I know they love this business. I know they love the people that they work with. They want to make sure that their employees are taken care of by the buyer. They want to ensure that this business they've built is remembered in some way or honored in some way. And
Sure. Yeah.
it is, make no mistake, it is a second full-time job to sell your business. It's temporary, but it is still a lot of time and effort. And yeah, I just hate to see sellers leave that money on the table like that.
Right. Right. So we talked a little bit before we got started recording about the phenomenon of the younger, maybe MBA educated buyers coming into the market and looking to buy businesses. What kind of stuff are you seeing with that? Just because I think it's an interesting comment on the times, maybe.
It's actually been really refreshing, and I've been really excited to see a lot of this. And I see this on LinkedIn, just I think because of the special algorithm that LinkedIn has that pushes this stuff to me because of our M&A practice. But there are a lot of influencers out there who are giving people kind of the basic framework for how the deal works and how to go through diligence, how to source the companies they might be interested in buying. So it's been a really phenomenal, I don't know, awakening of sorts of this new entrepreneurship. And I love being a business owner now for 9, almost 10 years. I absolutely love it. I will never go back to work for someone else.
No,
maybe famous last words, right? But I can't foresee that in the near future. And so, we've, in a lot of the inquiries we get buy side are from individuals who haven't owned a business before. Now, they're really smart. They're really determined. They're, in most instances, really highly educated, and they're just looking for a path that's a little bit different than, 30 years at a company and socking money away in the 401k and hopefully retiring comfortably someday. So I can really dig that kind of risk-taking and belief in their self.
Yep. No, I would agree. And I agree with you, though. I think those are fascinating people to work with, right? Mm-hmm. The conversations I have with the business owners are some of my favorite conversations because they are so curious about how the world works. And they ask fantastic questions. And it's interesting to kind of get to walk around inside their world. You meet someone and they say, "Oh, I do this." And I kind of stop and think, that's actually a business? And I've started to figure out that the more arcane the business appears, the more where I'm kind of scratching my head trying to figure out how it works, often the more profitable the business is.
Oh, those margins on those weird businesses that you don't think about are usually insane.
Yeah. And you say, who's your competition? And you have the owner say, we really don't have a lot of competition because we do this really well, and it's this really small thing.
Yeah. Well, the last individual I spoke with last month, who is not a business owner, who's considering buying a business, it's a retail store, and it's a very highly specialized, very niche retail store. It's very small, but the more research they did, they realized there aren't many of these. And if you could get from one city to another, even to these like mid-major metropolitan areas like Cincinnati or Nashville or Indianapolis, there's really nothing like it there. And they're all of a sudden, they're not thinking about buying 1 or 2 locations in a smaller city. They're now thinking, if we can really accomplish what we think we can accomplish in the first 12 or 24 months, man, why can't we be can't we drive sales and revenue through the roof by expanding into these other areas? So the vision that they have is inspiring, and certainly no reason I think that they can't follow through and accomplish that. There's just things they got to be smart about along the way, but they certainly have all the tools here at the outset to try to make it happen.
That's great. Well, Matt, I really appreciate your time. If you would, tell folks how they can find you out there in the great big world.
Sure. I'm at lockabylaw.com. That is the email address for my law firm. You can read all about the firm, its various practice areas there, a bio on the website, of course. They can reach me on email at mlockaby@lockabylaw.com. And if they were really interested, they could even go to Axis's website, the HR consulting company we talked about briefly earlier, axishrky.com. And it also talks about the HR company's M&A activities with working with buyers to help them evaluate targets, the target's talent and leadership, and just those basic HR things that are kind of part and parcel to operating a business. Axis will helps run that diligence and even help you integrate that team into one big happy family. So you can find me at either of those locations.
That's wonderful. I appreciate the time. We may have to do round 2 because I'm pretty sure you and I could come up with more things to talk about.
That sounds great. I would love that.
All right.
Yeah, no, that was a really, really interesting conversation, Matt. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. For listeners, I two things I want to point out. One is all of Matt's contact information will be in the show notes, but it's Lockaby, Lockaby. So that if you're not sure how you spell the last name, I just want to make it clear for y'all. Josh, for listeners who were listening to you and thinking maybe Josh is somebody I need to sit down and have a conversation with about some things, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way is Context Financial, CONTEXT, financial.com. All the contact information's on there, and there's no charge for a conversation. So if you think we might have some questions, let's talk about it and see what happens.
No. And Josh is a pretty personable guy. He and I talk, and I can tell you, he's an enjoyable conversationist. So do reach out to him and give him a shot if you're so inclined. The other thing I would like to ask you to do is, if you're not a subscriber to the podcast already, become a subscriber. And all you have to do for that is hit the follow button. Then you are notified every time Josh drops a new episode, and you can give it a listen. And if you like it, please tell people about it. It's a world full of bots where you get all kinds of weird recommendations from things you don't know about and people you never heard of. So it's nice. If you like this, tell a friend about it. Word of mouth promotion is a really effective tool, and we'd appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Josh and everybody at Context Financial. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Transition Talks, Business Exit and Retirement Strategies with Josh Ackerman from Context Financial. Are you a business owner looking to sell or make a transition? Connect with Josh on social media using today's show notes links. You might just be his next guest. To ensure you don't miss a new episode, please click the follow button. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Context Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.